During the solar eclipse on May 30th, 1984, the sky started to get darker, and the temperature began to fall because of the lack of sunlight. At that moment, researchers saw a group of chimpanzees kept in captivity at the Yerkes Regional Primate Research Center in Atlanta move to the top of the climbing structure within their enclosure. The eclipse went on. The chimpanzees faced the sun and constantly stared upwards. One of the animals even pointed at the sun and the moon. Scientists had never observed this behavior before. The chimpanzees never acted this way at any other time of the day. We can't know for sure how the chimps' minds worked at that moment and what they were thinking. Were they feeling their own form of curiosity, wonder, or even reverence for such an event? Or was it something different? But the chimpanzees clearly noticed the eclipse and definitely reacted. And actually, it's not just primates that behave this way. Back in 1560, the German mathematician and astronomer Christopher Clavius, who witnessed a total solar eclipse, wrote, "There was darkness in some manner greater than night. Neither could one see where one stepped. Stars appeared in the sky, and the birds fell down from the sky to the ground in terror of such horrid darkness." Alas, back then there were no cameras, so we had to create a 3D scene ourselves. But today, almost everyone has a camera in their hands. So there will be something to show. Oh, almost forgot. Here's an unobtrusive reminder to hit the like button if you forget to do it at the end of the video. There's so much to talk about today, and I need a coffee to get through it. This is a spider of the species Metapyra incrustata, which is classified as an orb-weaving spider, meaning it spins wheel-shaped webs. Well, you've probably seen one. You can find them practically everywhere. So during the total eclipse on July 11th, 1991, scientists decided to observe the behavior of these spiders. At first, the spiders were acting completely normal, but only until the total eclipse happened. And at that moment, the spiders suddenly started taking down their webs, as if night had suddenly fallen. But then the eclipse ended, and the spiders went back to weaving, just like they would at the start of a new day. Perhaps grumbling in spider language about not getting any sleep? But the study doesn't mention that. Overall, the study is especially intriguing because researchers artificially illuminated the webs of certain orb-weaving spiders, and they didn't dismantle their webs during the eclipse. It appears that the lighting was a crucial factor. Another example is flamingos. They were observed in Seneca Park, New York State, and during a total eclipse, flamingos circled around their young to protect them. Adult birds also gathered around the perimeter, huddling around the young and chicks. In short, they clearly perceived the eclipse as a threat. But apparently there isn't any universal behavior that all flamingos on Earth would share. For example, at the Smithsonian National Zoo, the animal care team noted only one incident of unusual animal behavior during an eclipse. Flamingos stood out, but in a completely different way. They just became very quiet. Normally, the birds were always squabbling, and only the eclipse made them quiet. In the Dallas Zoo, the flamingos started behaving as if night had fallen and it was time to prepare for sleep. They all gathered in the water where they usually sleep. A similar situation occurred in Phoenix. Almost all the flamingos stood on one of their long legs, tucked their heads into their feathers, and began to doze off. They woke up as soon as the eclipse was over. But why do animals react at all? It's simple. Temperature and light change, and animal behavior is always influenced by what they experience in their environment. During a total eclipse, the environment changes quite quickly, transitioning from a sunny day to a fairly dark one. They have to adapt somehow. And sometimes the ways of adapting are quite strange. At Riverbank Zoo and Garden in South Carolina, there's a group of 35 leisurely giants that can weigh up to 880 pounds and live over 150 years. I'm talking about Galapagos tortoises. So during the peak of an eclipse, they started reproducing. Did they think it was dark and no one was watching? Normally, Galapagos tortoises spend whole days doing practically nothing. So such a change in mood really surprised scientists. Tortoises of other species, on the contrary, became more active and moved quickly. After the eclipse, all tortoises were looking at the sky. While researchers aren't entirely certain why animals acted like this, they suggest that it might be a reaction to anxiety. How do you handle stress? Also, a solar eclipse, especially a total one, can affect the flight of moths and butterflies, which use light for navigation. In the zoo, they even slightly adjusted the lighting in the butterfly section to compensate for this. But overall, it's not really surprising. The gorillas were heading back to their dens, awaiting their last meal of the day. The zookeepers didn't allow them inside, of course, and the gorillas were very surprised, as in their understanding, the day had already ended. This is about something called the circadian rhythm. For humans, it's largely internal, and anyone who's experienced changing time zones knows that feeling when the body doesn't sync with local time. However, for certain organisms, waking and sleeping cycles are mostly influenced by the sun, such as gorillas and spiders, and many others. That's why darkness during an eclipse can trigger responses typical of nighttime. But these are all animals that live in zoos and various laboratories. And what about wild ones? It turns out there are documented examples here too. In 2001, 250 volunteer naturalists teamed up to observe wild animals. The observers covered 31 miles to simultaneously conduct field research on African wildlife over the 3 days centered on the eclipse. It was the first project of its kind. Here's what they found out. During the eclipse, the hippos left the rivers and began heading to their usual nighttime feeding spots on land. But halfway there, the eclipse ended. Daylight came back, and the hippos stopped. The animals seemed nervous and on edge for the rest of the day. And you can understand them. It seemed like night had just arrived, and now it's daytime again. Anyone would be confused. Well, except for warthogs, crocodiles, zebras, water bucks, and a couple of lions who showed no obvious reaction to the eclipse. This might partly be due to some animals simply aren't able to realize the change, and some don't have a routine tied to the change of day and night, so they just do what they want. For example, lie down. With the baboons, everything was pretty standard. As the eclipse progressed, they stopped eating, and observers guessed they might be heading back to their sleeping spots. But once the sunlight returned, they settled in their usual place and went back to their usual baboon activities. But what I especially like is the story about the bewildered ground squirrel. This incident isn't related to the year 2001 or naturalists, but it's too good not to share. The eclipse occurred in January 1889. And ornithologist Walter Bryant described the animal's behavior at the moment. Besides birds, he found a ground squirrel standing at the burrow entrance with cheek pouches stuffed with corn. The ground squirrel was so bewildered and thrown off by the sudden nightfall that it didn't even try to escape from the man. Moreover, it seemed not to notice the researcher at all. Just stood there with full cheeks trying to figure out how to live this life. Just like me in the mornings before my first cup of coffee. Actually, something like a solar eclipse affects all creatures of the planet to some extent. Even zooplankton changes its behavior. Did you know that the largest migration event in the world is the daily rise of zooplankton in the world ocean from the depths to shallower waters in response to signals from the sun? I just found out. Plankton moves up and down at sunset and sunrise, respectively. During the 2017 eclipse, scientists discovered that zooplankton behaved according to its script. It migrated upward as the sky darkened and then returned to the depths of the ocean when the sun reappeared from behind the moon. Birds aren't lagging behind. Daytime soaring birds like vultures and red-tailed hawks typically had to roost during an eclipse. It's because they rely on thermals off the sun's energy for soaring. Therefore, when it gets dark, the birds head down to Earth. It all makes sense. Thermals disappear at night. Birds that catch insects in flight, like swallows, also leave the sky. First, their prey doesn't fly at night, and second, the swallows themselves lose their ability to see. One study even showed that huge clouds of birds wheeling through the sky descended to the ground in numbers so large that it was clearly visible on radar images. See? As soon as the sun disappeared, all the birds landed. The situation with nocturnal birds is quite the opposite. During the total eclipse on August 21, 2017, night birds like owls were seen making group flights, as if night had arrived. You can understand them. If it's dark, it's time to eat. Most other birds, doves, egrets, ibis, trumpeter, hornbills, and geese fell silent during the eclipse. And then I thought, what about roosters? They also react to the sun. It turns out I'm not the only one who thought about that. Just in April 2024, scientists conducted an experiment on a rooster to see if it would crow in response to the sun appearing after an eclipse. The answer is yes. 15 minutes after the eclipse ended, the rooster jumped onto its perch and started crowing. But overall, animal behavior during eclipses is such an interesting topic that people actually come together to understand it. A simple example is crows. To understand how these birds behave during eclipses, even entire blogs are created. People go out on the streets, observe, share their observations. Why specifically crows? They are very peculiar birds. Some of the crows gathered in flocks and acted more noisily than usual. Others, on the contrary, tried to be as quiet as possible, even half an hour after the eclipse, as if, I don't know, they were afraid of something. And that's just a few examples. One must say that such an observation is fairly common practice, even within scientific circles. Researchers often invite ordinary people to join their efforts to whatever extent they can. You can simply observe animals and then share the collected data. There are even specific apps like iNaturalist where you can put anything interesting. Even NASA collected data in a similar way. Before the April 2024 eclipse, a citizen science project called Eclipse Soundscapes was launched to study how such cosmic events impact wildlife. Why bother with all this? In short, scientists simply can't keep up with observations. Eclipses have a highly changeable nature, occurring worldwide with different frequencies and extents. It's impossible to chase eclipses across continents, and why bother when you can ask for help? And it's not like some new idea. Back in 1932, New England entomologist William Wheeler placed ads in local newspapers urging people to note changes in animal behavior during a solar eclipse. Ultimately, he gathered over 500 accounts of everything imaginable, including crickets chirping, owls hooting, and bees returning to their hives. And there are always zoos. So when a new eclipse is on the horizon, scientists prepare to observe animals in several zoos at once because we have very little information about animal behavior at such times. And we need to understand if peculiarities repeat within one species. If each eclipse affects them equally, and if there are other factors out there, for example, if tortoises started mating in 2017 during an eclipse, would they start doing it during the 2024 eclipse? Or was it a one-time thing? As a result, in 2024, out of the 17 observed species, 13 of them showed unusual behavior. Around 75% of the animals in the zoo exhibit evening or nighttime behavior. Another frequent reaction was clear anxiety, but I couldn't find any information about the tortoises. But at least I found something about bees. During the eclipse, they went back to their hive when it got almost completely dark, and then they tried to scout. 2 scout bees left the hive after the eclipse and came back after some time, but whatever they reported, the swarm didn't leave the hive again that day. They probably decided it was a bad idea. Better to sleep. Giraffes in zoos start running around their enclosure and only calm down when the sun comes up. At least that's how it was in 2024. The Komodo dragon acted pretty much the same. It sat still all day, and during the solar eclipse, it suddenly started running around. But what intrigued people most at the zoo in 2024 was the behavior of the wolves. People thought that during the eclipse, the wolves would start howling and doing something wolfish. But alas, that didn't happen. The wolves just ran restlessly around their enclosure, like some giraffes. After all, they're not here to do what we expect of them. I told you from the start it would be interesting. You owe me a like. See you later.